Here we go. So we are live. Thank you everyone for being here today in your probably very busy schedule as it is getting closer to Pesach. And this is why we are here. Just like the title indicates, Pesa'h Refresher, so that we can put ourselves back into the right way of getting ready. I always need to mention before we start that we, the husbands, are very much aware of all the work that you guys put together. The Seder table would not be looking the same without you, even though the husbands are sitting at the head of the table. We all know that it required so much effort and so much sacrifice from the ladies. So thank you so much for everything that you are doing to have a Pesach kasher v'sameach. It's very important to remember the combo that Pesach is beforehand kasher, because we have so much to know about kashrut, but we want to make sure that all these investments will not cost us the price of simcha. We have to make sure that the holiday will be as joyful and as happy as possible. When we reflect at last year's Pesach, I am sure that this year's Pesach will look definitely better, happier, and greater. At this point, I'm going to try to divide the class into different sections. I'm going to start off actually with the exceptions of this year, because I think that there are a lot of questions around Pesach that falls on Motzei Shabbat. Eventually, I will go back to the preparation of Pesach, which is what we call the Libun Hag'ala / kosher kitchen, and take questions, obviously. And in the end, maybe if there are questions about different products list for Pesach, I can also try to do so. So I have a whole, my own structure of the class, but I want you to know that if you have at any point questions, please feel free to interfere, to ask them, so that I can answer in my best, in the best of my abilities. Okay, so let's start off with this year exceptional Pesach, which happens to be on Motzei Shabbat. Obviously, everybody is wondering what's going to be for the meals of Shabbat, and I will get there. But beforehand, we should know that everything that we usually do on every year that Pesach falls on the 14th of Nisan at night, so that would be actually it's the 15th of Nisan at night, so that's Motzei 14. Everything will be advanced this year to the 13th, okay, eventually the 14th of Nisan. And what I mean by that is that we should be 95% ready for Pesach a day beforehand. Okay, so when it comes to Shabbat itself, you are going to have two different options, which you should discuss with your husbands. But I will give you first the rules, and then you will decide whatever is easier for you. The rules are regarding the eating of the chametz, that you are allowed to eat chametz up to Shabbat day, Shabbat morning, 10 a.m., which means that if you are planning at any point to eat chametz, you need to make sure that the chametz will be out of the house, will be out of your table by 10 a.m. And this is where I would go to option one, where your husband would pray early in the minyan, here in SLC, that will be at 6:30. Well, we finished praying hopefully by 8:30. And the husbands will not be hanging out in the shul, at least for now. They will go home, eat a Seudat Shabbat early with hamotzi, because we have a mitzvah to eat bread for the first, at least for the first two Seudot Shabbat, for Shabbat dinner and Shabbat lunch. And the bread will be basically out of the table, out of the house by 10:10, preferably beforehand. That option of eating early the Shabbat lunch means that you are going to have only, I would suggest, a pita bread on the side, a kazait of a kazait of bread is, I would say, the minimum, which is 1 ounce. Preferably, it should be kabetza, which is 2 ounces of bread. If you want to have just a Ziploc bag in advance to just have the quantity of bread on the side, not at the table, maybe in one corner of the house, that's actually a very good idea. This way you just have the kazait and you would continue the seudah with a kasher lepesach meal. Make sure that the area that they ate the chametz will be swept, that the chametz is already in the garbage, outside, eventually. Wash your hands after doing that. Brush even your teeth. I know for some minhagim, we don't brush teeth on Shabbat. Ashkenazim are more mahmir, but before Pesach, if you can do so softly to make sure that there is no blood coming out, that would be preferable. For some who have dentures, it's also necessary to clean them before Pesach from the chametz. And after 10:10, pretty much everything will have to be kasher lepesach in the house. So this was option 1, where you are planning to have a chametz for both meals. Okay, so that's Shabbat dinner and Shabbat lunch. And once again, I truly recommend that you don't have the bread at the table, because your house would be completely kasher lepesach. The recipes you will have for that Shabbat should also be kasher lepesach, the dishes, etc. Kasher lepesach is just a much easier way to do things the right way. Option number 2 is to not have bread at all on Shabbat. And when it comes to having the Seudat Shabbat the right way, you will have to use what we call a Masame Buchelet or Masame Tugenet or Matzah Ashira. So let me explain. This is an option that some people would do if they want to have lunch not so early. It's hard for many people to eat lunch so early. So if you can't, if it's too hard for you, you do have an option to have lunch a little bit later. Later means after 10:10, making sure that that lunch will be completely kasher lepesach. Oh, but you have to do hamotzi. That's not a problem, because you will say hamotzi on a matzah that is cooked, a matzah that is fried, or what we call the egg matzah, the matzah ashira. But it does make a difference if you choose option 1, 2, or option 3. Let me explain. If you have a matzah mevushelet, so a cooked matzah or a matzah metugenet, which is a fried matzah, you technically only need to have a kazait or a kabetza, better to have a kabetza, and you are yotzei yedei chava, you fulfill the obligation of having bread during the meal. And by the way, this obligation, I just should mention that it's not just for the men. This is on every Shabbat for men and for ladies as well. So what is a matzah mevushelet? I am not really a chef to tell you how to cook a matzah. Hacham Ovadia brings different options where you would insert the matzah into some kind of a stew or some kind of a soup and let the matzah cook in it, extract the matzah after cooking it, and eat that matzah with the beracha of hamotzi. Why the matzah should be cooked or should be fried? Because on Erev Pesach, which means the whole day before the Seder, you are not allowed to eat the matzah in general. So therefore, you have the obligation to eat hamotzi for the seudah, but you can't have matzah. So you have to juggle between those two. And the best option will be to eat a matzah that is cooked, which means that you can't use this matzah for the seder, but you could eat that matzah during Shabbat to fulfill the obligation of having hamotzi. And since it's not hametz, you could have that meal later on, so after 10:10, as a regular Shabbat. Matzah ashira, which is the next option, which is egg matzah, is also possible. You could use a matzah, but the only way you can say hamotzi on this matzah ashira is if you eat 8 ounces of matzah, which is very, very difficult. And I don't think anybody wants to stuff themselves with 8 ounces of egg matzah on Shabbat. So this is why I don't think that this option would work. If it does work better for you, go ahead. Okay, but these are really the main 2 options. So again, option 1 was to eat an early meal with hametz and be very careful to just get rid of the hametz by 10:10. And option 2 was to eat a normal later meal with cooked fried matzah or matzah ashira. And this way, you don't have an issue of eating a real Matzah on Erev Pesach and eating Hametz because it's an actual Matzah. Regardless of what you choose, by 10:10, which is when you finish eating the Hametz in general, you will have to make a bitul. Your husband will make a bitul. This is the bitul that we usually say when we burn the Hametz. So remind him on Shabbat so he doesn't forget. Honey, make sure to say the bitul. This is the bitul that's called the absolute bitul, where you are going to say, he's going to say that all the Hametz that is in my possession should be nullified and considered like the dirt of the ground. The third time he adds the word hefker. Just take a mahzor of Pesach and follow the right nosach formulation to say the right bitul. So like I said, after you finish eating your hametz. I would add one more thing regarding Shabbat. This is, I would say, specifically for the ladies. Remember that because Shabbat is only over at 7:57 p.m., this is where Motzei Shabbat is, then you won't be able to set the Seder table until that time. I know it's very hard. I know it's definitely requiring a sacrifice for that. But the fact that we have Shabbat that is only over at that time, you're not allowed to prepare from Shabbat to Yom Tov. Shabbat is a higher level of holiness, and therefore you have to make sure that whatever you have in mind to prepare, actively prepare for the Seder table, will have to be done after 7:57. Be reassured, in the time that we have for the schedule for Armenianim in the Bet Knesset, we try to make sure that your husband will not be hanging out in shul while you prepare, but he will be hopefully home to help you out, unless you rather that he doesn't come and help you. Okay, that's everybody's your own choice. But according to our schedule, Arbit will be at 7:20 in SLC, which means that he would get home. He should be home by around 8, maybe 8:05, 8:10, depending where you live, in order to help you out to set the Seder table. The second day, it's going to be probably much earlier because it is Motzei Yom Tov. And therefore, I believe, based on what I have in my schedule, you would start preparing for the second Seder by 7:36. Okay, 7:36 p.m. So that's about almost a half hour earlier. And this way you will be able to start earlier and have an easier time. I see that there is a question on the chat, so I will just check it out. Okay. Sorry, Claire, I didn't see that question before. So you were asking what kind of matzah is matzah ashira? Is that the regular box matzah? No, the matzah ashira is what we call the egg matzah. Okay, the egg matzah. Ashkenazim don't eat that. We Sephardim are mekel. We are more lenient with the matzah ashira, with the egg matzah, and that's an option for Shabbat in order to fulfill the obligation of having bread for the seudah of Shabbat. So this is why I was saying that you could have a matzah ashira for lunch, so egg matzah for lunch, but if you go with that option, then you would have to eat 8 ounces of egg matzah in order to say hamotzi on it. So that's a pretty tough one, and I'm sure many people would not be so comfortable with it. Okay. Do we have any questions? Any other questions so far, or this is okay? All right. So this, I think, was really what I think this year big questions would be about. There are more halachot that I usually talk about in the daily halacha on a daily basis. I started actually this morning, probably for like tomorrow and the next day we'll talk about other details like the bedikat hametz, the way it works. But I didn't think that it connects directly to the ladies, so this is why I don't know if I should cover that right now. I think that we could jump straight to the kosher kitchen itself. Okay. So just as a refresher, koshering the kitchen before Pesach, what we call the libun, the hag'ala, the Rui Caligrison, the Rui Kalishini or Shariat Kalishini, all these concepts, I'm going to summarize this with one principle, with one ruling And the ruling is what we call kebol'o kachpolto. Kebol'o kachpolto means that whatever use you had throughout the year in that pot, in that utensil, will be the way that you will extract the hametz that is potentially absorbed inside. Some people don't have the luxury to have a totally different set of Pesach dishes coming from the cutlery, pots, pans, glass, etc. So there are ways to kosherize the kitchen utensils and the kitchen pots once we follow this ruling, and that covers pretty much everything that will be in touch with food. And what I mean by that is that we go from the barbecue grill, to the oven, which are the very serious type of absorption, since the food is directly exposed to the fire, and it makes it very hard or very severe the way to make it kosher. For example, for instance, sometimes it's just so hard to do it that we will tell you straight, don't use it on Pesach. This applies for the toaster oven, for example, the tiny toaster oven that you have. This is, most rabbis, Sephardic and Ashkenazi rabbis say not to use it at all on Pesach. Just put it away with the hametz that you are selling, and don't take the risk to use it on Pesach at all. The oven is a little bit more difficult because you want to use the oven. Sometimes you have one oven at, and sometimes you have two ovens, one halavi, one basari. It's just something that we use much more. And there are obviously different ways to kosher the oven. Again, much more serious than other places because the food is directly exposed to the fire. So if we talk about the oven, for example, just as a reminder, it really depends what kind of oven you have. If the oven has a self-cleaning option, that's definitely the best. I think it goes up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So you would go with that option. You should leave the oven unused for 24 hours before you actually proceed to the self-clean mode. If you don't have the self-clean option, then you would have to go with cleaning. I would say cleaning as much as you can the oven and turning on the oven at the highest temperature. Okay. Once again, like I said before, not having the oven used for 24 hours, and that should be enough to use that oven on Pesach. Okay, so I'm trying to go from the, I would say, the most serious, the highest level of libun. This is what we call the libun, which means with actual fire. For the oven racks, the oven trays, because again, they are inside the oven, the only way to kosher them is to have them inside the oven as well. Now, many times, if you put those in the self-clean mode, they might get ruined. And I don't want to be that person to tell you to try, because it's not a good idea to try something that can ruin your trays and racks. So the best option would be to not to use them, just like the toaster oven, and to use different ones in order to use your oven during Pesach. Unless, like I said, you want to take the risk to kosher them inside the oven itself. Okay, so that would be at your own risk, and I just can't tell you to do it because I don't want you to ruin them in case. The second level of what we call the hag'ala, so the purging of the kelim, is the most famous type of hag'ala is using the hag'ala bikli rishon, which means that we are going to use a pot and we are going to boil water inside. The pot should be clean. The pot doesn't have necessarily to be kasher lePesach, by the way, as long as you're performing the hag'ala before the time of Isur, so before the time of not being able to have hametz, to eat hametz, to have hametz in the house. So you could use a regular pot for that and kosher the different utensils that were used directly on a keli rishon, which means in a keli that was in a pot that was on the fire and used with water. That works, by the way, for both pots and pans, even if the pan is used with oil. And you may think that when you use oil, then it's probably hotter, or it sticks to the pot much more, to the pan much more. According to us Sephardim, not for the Ashkenazim, but according to us Sephardim, Hag'ala Bikli Rishon is enough. So there is a way to kosher your pan for Pesach. Once you will, like I said before, make sure to fill it up with water. The pan should be clean. If you have rust on it, you don't have to go crazy to take it out. Rust is not considered hametz. And second, okay. And you should know also that you should not use that pan for 24 hours in order to create a situation that is not ben yomo. It's not the taste absorbed is already damaged. And once you have done the hag'ala the right way, then you could use that pot on Pesach. Okay, so the hag'ala the right way in the pot, just to remind you, is to make sure that you fill it up with boiling hot water. Eventually have that water overflow to make sure to cover all the angles. And once you have done that, you should be able to use the pot during Pesach. This can also, by the way, work even for the pots that are a little more complicated, such as there is a pot called, I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's called I'm sorry? Who's that? So no, that's not the one I was thinking about. I think it's called, I forgot the name of it. It usually has some kind of a cover on top. It basically holds the heat. Pressure cooker, I think that's what it's called, right? So the pressure cooker also can be kosher for Pesach. That's a possibility. But you have to make sure, and that's, by the way, for all pots, that the areas like the handles, like the little shtick that is on top, you can have hametz sometimes that is there, and you really have to clean them well. Okay, so like I said before, 24 hours, wait 24 hours before doing the hag'ala, clean them very well, and then perform the hag'ala in those pots. You could use the pot itself to kosher other kelim. So let's say you want to kosher knives, you want to kosher cutlery in general that were used directly in the Kalishini, in the primary utensil on the fire. You could use this pot to kosher those the cutlery. Make sure if you put a lot of them inside to shake it a little bit to make sure that the water will be really all around the cutlery and it's not just going to be in one area. This happens when you have a lot of them inside, that the water will not be really everywhere. So that's what you really should do. And after you have the cutlery inserted in that pot, you take everything out and you rinse them out with cold water to make sure that the hametz that was rejected is actually now removed completely outside whatever cutlery you would be inserting in the Keli Rishon. So this is really like the second level. We call that the Hag'ala. The third level is what we call Rui Caligrison. Okay, and I'm just giving you examples, like big examples, but when it comes to actual details, obviously we're gonna have some other elements that can come into the picture. But overall, the concept of Rui Caligrison is to use either a kettle or an urn that is on the fire, or a pot, and you would pour that hot water after ebullition on top of a surface, on top of an area, or on top even of dishes that were not directly used on the fire, okay? So this applies, for example, for the countertop, the kitchen countertops, the sinks. Obviously, the sinks is actually, I was reading this year that Chacham Yitzchak Yosef is a little bit more strict about the sink in order to not require aluminum or anything between the kasher Pesach food and the sink. He requires to do it 3 times. Okay, this is the first time that I'm seeing this. But for the sink itself, he said that we should pour the boiling hot water on the sink 3 times. For the kitchen countertop, he's not as strict. So 1 time should be enough. But there are a few things that we should be creative about. Whoever does the kosherization in your kitchen, you should always start from the lowest point and go to the higher one. And what I mean by that is that you shouldn't do the kitchen countertop before you do the sink. Do the sink first, and after that, do the kitchen countertop. Because if you start with the kitchen countertop, which are above that, you may rely on the fact that the water came from the countertop and went into the sink, and that's not enough. Why it's not enough? Because the water cannot just spread and reach the other point. It's very important when you perform the Rui Caligrison, so the pouring from the primary hot water, the primary keli hot water, that you really pour in each area by itself, and not just pour in one area and let the water flow to the other side. That's going to be colder as the water travels on the countertop, especially if it's stone, especially if it's something that is cold by itself. So that would really cool off the water that you are spreading, and that's why you really should do it progressively, little by little. Okay, in each spot of the countertop. I should also mention that it's very, very important that when you are pouring that boiling hot water on your sink, on your kitchen countertop, you have to make sure that the surface will be completely dry. If the surface is a little moist or wet, then you really have a problem that the irui was not performed the right way, because whatever liquid you would have there would cool off and weaken the power of the irui, and it wouldn't be done the right way. So really the right way of doing so is to first clean it, dry it, and pour the boiling hot water on top of it. This also applies for the sink, we said. It applies also for the kitchen countertop. It applies also for the table. Now, I know a lot of people are very sensitive with the table, especially if it's made of wood. You know that if a table made of wood gets water on it, it could ruin it. And I don't want you to ruin your table. So if it is the case, I would suggest to clean the table very, very well, and to have a permanent tablecloth on this table the entire Pesach, to make sure to never eat on the actual table, and to always use a tablecloth on it. That should be enough. Just make sure not to ruin the table. It's not worth it. So this was the third level of koshering the kitchen. The last one is what we call the Kalishini. Okay, Kalishini is whatever was used. So it was never used, throughout. There was no pouring from a primary keli rishon onto that dish. It was always used either cold or as a Kalishini, which is a secondary kind of utensil. In that situation, we have a concept that Kalishini eno bolea, does not really absorb because it's too weak, and it would be enough to just clean those dishes. Okay, make sure that there is no hametz. So usually you have that, let's say, in serving platters. Okay, especially silverware, where we are a little bit more careful to not pour anything directly on them. You would use maybe like a ladle all the time, or a fruit platter that you have. It's always used, at cold. You need to still make sure, if you want to use them on Pesach, that they have to be completely clean. Now, these are the 4 levels. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the material or different areas of the kitchen. So when we think about material, there is one material that is kind of a lifesaver, and another material that is just the worst thing in the world. Okay, let's talk about the one that is, I would say, the easiest one to kosher, and that is glass. Glass/Pyrex. Okay, everything that is made of glass. For us Sephardim, not the Ashkenazim, only for Sephardim, there is no need to do any hagala. And what I mean by that is that it's just enough to clean them, to wash them, and you could use them on Pesach. So technically speaking, anything that you have made of glass, Pyrex crystal, you just have to make sure that it's very clean, and you could use the same set throughout Pesach. There is no problem whatsoever. Again, only for Sephardim. For Ashkenazim, it's actually very bad. That's the easiest one. The worst nightmare for the Hagala, which Hagala does not work ever, is what we call the Keli Cheres. What is a Keli Cheres? So whatever is made of, I think it's called earthenware. Earthenware, is that such a word? Yes, okay. So earthenware, you can have china, for example, anything made of clay, if there is such a thing today. All that will be impossible to kosher. You just cannot kosher that. There is a concept, Keli Cheres bolea ve'eno polet, which means they only absorb, but they never reject the taste. So it's impossible for you to kosher that. Whatever dishes you have made of porcelain will be completely asur to use on Pesach, unless, and I think I have a feeling that it's actually most china today, if you have a layer on the porcelain that is shiny, which shows that it's not just porcelain, it's also glass, it's also crystal or whatever it is. In that situation, so that would take us actually to the best case scenario, where you technically don't have to kosher them, you just have to rinse them out. But here is the trick. If your plate will be cracked at some point, chipped in one area, then that area will be porcelain, because that's really the material inside. So you really want to make sure that it's completely smooth if you want to use them on Pesach, and that will be enough to just clean them, wash them well enough to make sure that there is no hametz whatsoever. Do we have any questions so far, or I can just continue?
The little button, something.
It's a lot of technical halachot.
Oh, but like a little snap
No,
or something.
no more questions. Okay, so I guess I will continue. And I can just go around the kitchen, I would say randomly, to think about the different things. And I'm sure that you guys know that already, just reviewing this together. Fridge and freezer that are always used at cold, you would assume that you don't need to do any hagala, you just need to clean them very well. But just pay attention sometimes, the area of the door where you have the rubber gasket, sometimes you have a lot of hametz that is accumulating there. That's something definitely to pay attention to. I even saw in Chacham Yitzchak Yosef mentioning the aeration area where you have the air coming out or coming in. Sometimes you can have some hametz getting there. If you don't have access to it at all, then don't bother. But if you do have access to it, it's definitely worth taking a look and make sure that it's going to be completely clean. Even though you don't have to do hagala there, you will do a cleaning because you have hametz all the time in there. And you should also pay attention to the areas where hametz can get stuck. It's something definitely worth paying attention to.
Look at home with Corona, and look what they did for me.
The microwave that you want to use for Pesach. So that's a little bit of a different story because it doesn't really work like a normal oven. So there are a few steps for the microwave. Step number 1, clean it very well. Step number 2, don't use it for 24 hours. Step number 3, you're going to insert in the microwave a cup full of water and a lot of soap to make sure that once you turn it on, it's going to go everywhere in the corners. And you're going to turn on the microwave with that.
Wait, I'm sorry, Rabbi.
A bowl made with soap, and let it run for between 3 to 5 minutes to really make sure that it went everywhere. And your microwave is officially kasher lePesach. But once again, Chacham Yitzchak Yosef recommends to wrap the food that you will use, that you will heat up inside the microwave. Remember that it's a very small item. You use it many times for hametz during the year. So sensitive area, and you want to really, try to be more mahmir when it comes to that. Let's talk also about the dishwasher. The dishwasher. Sorry about that. dishwasher that you want to use during Pesach. So the right way of doing it is to not use it for 24 hours, once again, to let it run empty, okay, one time is enough. And when you are letting it run empty, you make sure that you have soap. Put as much soap as possible, don't ruin it, but you put a lot of soap because that soap will actually clean the dishwasher. And once you've done that, you can use it without any problem during Pesach. What else should we talk about? You know, there are some tiny details that we don't really think or we don't really cover in those Pesach classes, and these are, you know, the other items in the house. And I say also like belongings, personal belongings. Think about your rings. Okay, if you have a ring that you wear all the time, you should definitely use that, you know, clean that ring. You should definitely clean that ring before Pesach because you definitely will have hametz, you know, that can get stuck. So go over your jewelry box and make sure that whatever you use will be completely clean. Also, another thing that's interesting, Hacham Yitzhak Yosef also mentioned that the phones in the house. Many times you're in the middle of eating, you don't think so much about, you know, the phone that you are using around. Think about that. Definitely something that may have hametz, and you can actually extend that to much more. If you have a laptop, okay, a laptop, it's very possible that you were eating hametz at the same time. So you want,
No.
yes, no problem. So the laptop, okay, you may eat at the same time, you know, hametz. You want to make sure that it's going to be clean, not just the laptop. You're gonna the what's it called,
Yes.
the knapsack or the whatever bag you are using for all that. These are like random items that sometimes we don't really pay attention to, and there is hametz in there.
Let's make sure it's very important.
Chairs, the chairs of the kitchen, the chairs of the living room, dining room, especially the dining room. Many times you're going to have hametz that is stuck, you know, in some areas. The baby chair, for sure, the baby chair is going to put his hand everywhere. Okay, this is something that definitely needs a real good cleaning to make sure that there is no hametz in there. Broom, dustpan.
You know what I mean?
Very recommended to just buy a new one and throw the one you were using with a hametz throughout the year. Don't forget, this is a killer. This one. If you have a vacuum bag, okay, this is something definitely where I think is you don't think about it because you don't see the bag. But let's say you vacuum your whole house, Baruch Hashem, the house is completely clean. You forgot to empty the bag of the vacuum, it's full of hametz and it's still inside the house. Now, if you didn't do it, or if you didn't do it last year or the years before, don't feel too bad because you said the bitul, your husband said the bitul, so he had in mind to nullify that hametz that he definitely is not interested and you are not interested to have access to. But once again, you have a real hametz gamor that is there, you want to definitely get rid of it. Okay, so these are like the tiny things that we sometimes don't think about. I was thinking yesterday about something else that is interesting. Maybe you guys can help me with this. In some sinks, so before I get to that, just, you know, sometimes there is something that you have by the drain. I think it's called the how do you call this? The filter, the drain filter. You know, so the drain filter sometimes is, you know, holding all the hametz. You could kosher that by using a Rui Caligrison, just like the sink itself. But if you feel that it's too hard because the hametz is really stuck, then it could be a good idea to change it. I'm not saying you have to change it, but if you feel that it's very hard to clean it and the hametz is still stuck in there, then that's what, you know, that's what should be done. To wash it in the dishwasher will not be enough. You can wash it in the dishwasher and then pour on top of it boiling hot water from a primary Kalishini. That will be the right way of doing it. Okay. Now I want to go a little bit further. Sometimes in the drain itself, you have something that crushes whatever you have left. Okay. Some kitchen do have that. You have like a button. You press the button, and what happens is that it's crushing pretty much everything that is in there. Sometimes you have hametz that is still left. So do you have access to it? Don't you have access to it? I am not sure. Maybe you can help me with that. If you do have access to it, there's definitely a need to empty that area. Make sure to get rid of the chametz, the potential chametz that is in there, and not to have the chametz, stuck in there. Same thing. Also, someone mentioned that in some dishwashers, not all of them, there are some areas that the food is being filtered, and sometimes it just stays there. If you have chametz that is going to be stuck in your dishwasher in that area, at least where you have the chametz that was selected, separated, okay, from the other areas, definitely again something to think about, to empty the area and make sure that there is no more chametz. People also ask about the stove area. So there is something very interesting about the stove, and I'm going to reassure those who have an electric stove that is completely made of glass. Since we mentioned in the beginning that glass does not need any hechsher, any hag'ala, so it won't be enough if you just clean that area, okay? Clean that area, make sure that there is no chametz, and that's it, you're good to go. You don't have to pour boiling hot water on an electric stove. According to Sephardim, again, according to Ashkenazim, it's a different story. But if you have an electric stove, okay, just cleaning it will be enough. If you have a gas stove, that's a different story. You should clean it completely first. Pour boiling hot water from a primary, so Kalishini, okay, and this way that will be enough. For the crate themselves, I think it's called the crate, right? If I am not wrong. So whatever is holding, okay, the stove grates that are holding the pots. So it's very interesting because Chacham Yitzchak Yosef is debating the question. You should clean them. The question is, do you have to do hag'ala because they are touching directly the pots, or irui should be enough? It looks like he is leaning towards the leniency, and he said that it's enough to just pour boiling hot water on top of them, okay, because it's not like you're gonna actually eat the chametz that touched them. That's very unlikely to happen. So he says, just clean them well, pour boiling hot water on the grates, and you could use them for Pesach as well. There is one item that crossed my mind, and that's the spatula. The spatula that you are using directly in the primary Kalishini on the fire, okay, to stir the food, etc. Don't use it on Pesach. It's very, very difficult to clean it and to kosher it. There is always some kind of residue that is left there. And you should not use the spatula that you are using throughout the year at all. Put it away with the chametz stuff. Sell it if you want to. Okay, use a different spatula during Pesach. It's just not worth it at all. And I think that this applies also for all the barbecue accessories that you may want to use on Pesach. So koshering a barbecue for Pesach, barbecue grill, which is every man's dream. Okay, you want to have a barbecue on Pesach. I should tell you that it's usually very difficult. It's a long process because once again, we go to the very, very hardcore time of absorption where the chametz really is in contact with the fire. I would really recommend to have new grills for Pesach, complete new grills for Pesach. For the unit of the barbecue itself, if you are cleaning it really well, let's say you would use the easy off to really clean the entire area, and you would let the barbecue run in empty, like let the fire actually run when it's closed for 20 minutes, a half hour, that should be enough to be used on Pesach. But this is a heter that you don't want to take too easily, to really be on top of it and make sure that it's done the right way. I'm not really sure if there are any other areas that I didn't cover. We spoke about the oven, we spoke about the stove, we spoke about the kitchen countertop, we spoke about the table, the sink, microwave, fridge, freezer. I'm not really sure about other items. I mean, there are other items like a mixer, for example. If you want to use the mixer it's really not recommended. I would tell you that the mixer, because there are areas that are almost inaccessible, you can't have access to them, and the chametz can get stuck in there. It would be very hard to clean the right way. So you should not use the mixer that you are using throughout the year. A blender is a different story. The blender is it's easier to disassemble and to clean the right way, more than the mixer. And for the blender, we are a little bit more lenient. If you can clean it, the right way, using the Rui Caligrison and just a very serious cleaning, it should be enough to use them on Pesach. I'm really sure. Those who have a filter, also the kosher filter, etc., it's very recommended to clean it, because sometimes it could be holding chametz in there. You may argue and say that you don't have access at all to the filter. Well, it depends where your filter is. Okay, if it's behind a closed wall or whatever, maybe yes. But I think most filters, those blues filters that we have, are just right under the sink, and you do have access. It would be a great idea to check and make sure that that filter will be clean. If it's impossible, if it's too old, then it's a good idea to change that filter before Pesach. This way, again, the chametz would not be held there. There is also another thing which is very interesting, is the cutting board. I think most people are trying to have a cutting board that is kasher lePesach. Chacham Yitzchak Yosef says that it really depends on the type of cutting board. The cutting board that is made of wood, then he says that you could kosher it by sanding it. So if you know how to sand a cutting board, you could do that and use it for Pesach. If it's plastic or metal or something else, it's usually very hard, and he recommends to not use it for Pesach at all. He says to use a different one, especially that you're using their knife, something that is like onion, garlic, all that. It really absorbs in there. It's very hard to clean it. He says to avoid using it completely on Pesach if it's not made of wood. So that's also something interesting to know. I don't know if there is something else that I have in mind that we should be talking about. Nina was mentioning before the material called the, I think it's called enamel. I forgot exactly the name of it. It's like a new modern type of dishes. Okay, I forgot the name of it, but according to Sephardim, that would not be an issue because we just see it as metal. So whatever we applied beforehand will apply for the rest as well. I see, Pauline, you have a question. What is the best way to kosher the grill on the stove? You're talking about the grates, right? The stove grates, or the actual grill, the one that is completely on top, or the one that is holding the pots? Both. Okay. So we said regarding the grates, Chacham Yitzchak Yosef debates the question. He suggests, okay, two things. The first thing he says would be to clean them very well, like we always do for the Hagala. Make sure that there are no actual residue. So you would have to scrub them. And after that, you do the Rui Caligrison, which means that you take a kettle, boiling hot water, and you would pour it on top of them. It seems that by doing that, it should be enough. Okay. Some people require real Hagala, which means that they want to take the grates and to put them inside the boiling hot water. But he says that it's not really necessary because even though they touch the pot, it's very unlikely that even if you have the chametz falling in there or on top of it, you would actually take that chametz. Even if you have the food that you are cooking during Pesach falling on top of it, it's very unlikely that you would actually eat whatever touched. Now, I will say this. If you are grilling pita bread, okay, during the year on the grates, very bad idea to use that grate on Pesach and to grill matzah. That will be the worst idea in the world. You just made the grate an actual barbecue. So no good. But most people don't do that. Most people are using the grates just to hold the pot. And that's why he said it's enough. Like I said, number one, clean them well. And number two, pour boiling hot water on top of it. Okay, so that's regarding the grates. Now, regarding the grill that is on top of the pots, there is a ze'ah, which means there is usually like sweat or steam that is getting there. He does mention in the book to clean it. If you have a way to take it out, okay, and clean it this way, whichever way you could, it's fine. I'm not saying you have to do hagala, but he does mention to take out the hametz because the hametz accumulates and you technically cannot possess hametz during Pesach. So like I said, if you can take it out and clean it, that's what you should do. He mentions that. Otherwise, just go over whichever best cleaning supply you have to clean that type of metal and clean the area to make sure that it's clean, because you may have residue of hametz on the grill itself. Okay, do we have any question? Okay, I guess. Okay, I don't see any questions. So I would just go straight now to the, I would say, last part of the class, which will be quite fast. Last year, I made a list of almost 16 pages from different, I gathered different reliable lists between Rabbi Borusan, Rabbi Kohen, and the GSOR. I forgot exactly. I think the GSOR for the project at Al Kasher Le Pesach. I still have this list, and I think that it should be applicable also for this year. If I get any update, if I see that there is more information about that, you know, you can always be in touch with me and ask me to send it to you. I try to not publicize it because I don't want it to be like something that I would take the risk to just go out there and say like I'm an expert, because I'm not an expert. So I'm just trying, you know, to gather the reliable information that I get. But if someone needs it, I could just send that list personally so that you can do your shopping without worrying too much about the hashgachot. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up for now. Thank you for coming today, and I hope that this helped in the getting ready for Pesach the best possible way. Once again, I wish you atzlacha rabba and a lot of strength and courage and happiness in your preparation for Pesach and for the holiday itself. Pesach kasher besameach, tizku leshanim rabot, na'imot v'tovot.